King's Speech connects with A Course in Miracles in a surprisingly deep way because the film is really about voice, identity, fear, and the terror of exposure. King George VI's stammer is not presented merely as a speech defect. It becomes symbolic of a divided self, a man trapped between who he believes he must be and what is naturally trying to move through him. That is very ACM. The Course constantly points toward how the ego manufactures tension through self-concept. I must perform. I must not fail. I must maintain an image. I must deserve love. I must control perception. The more heavily identity is managed, the more constricted expression becomes. Notice how Birdie freezes most when he becomes self-conscious. The voice collapses under the weight of judgment. ACIM would say the ego's central weapon is self-monitoring rooted in fear. How am I appearing? Am I enough? Will I be attacked? Will I fail? The body tightens around the self-image. Lionel Logue's role is fascinating from an ACM perspective because he does not primarily fix Birdie, technically. He keeps dismantling hierarchy, shame, and false authority. He continually invites him out of role and into relationship, not be the perfect king, but be real. That is closer to healing than performance optimization. There's a deeply ACIM-like reversal in how healing occurs. The stammer softens not through domination, but through safety, trust, playfulness, honesty, and the collapse of rigid identity. One of the most important scenes is when Birdie curses fluidly without stammering. Why? Because for a moment, the monitored persona disappears. The ego mask cracks, and spontaneous expression flows. ACIM would not glorify profanity itself, but it would recognize the mechanism. Fear constricts. Openness extends. The film also exposes the burden of specialness. ACIM describes specialness as the ego's strategy of separation, being above, below, better, worse, more burdened, more unique, more important. Being king looks special, yet Birdie experiences it as imprisonment. He is trapped inside an image he feels incapable of sustaining. The world sees royalty. He feels fraudulence and terror. That split between appearance and inner experience is central to the ego structure. Lionel repeatedly refuses to worship the crown. That refusal becomes healing because it restores equality. ACM is radically egalitarian beneath forms. Behind titles, status, roles, and costumes is the same frightened and holy mind. The climax, the wartime speech, is also important spiritually. The miracle is not perfection. The stammer never fully disappears. That matters. Healing in ACIM is not necessarily the removal of every symptom or human limitation. Sometimes the deeper healing is the undoing of shame and isolation surrounding the symptom. Birdie stops fighting himself quite so violently. He begins allowing support, allowing relationship, allowing imperfection, allowing his voice to emerge without demanding omnipotence from it. That is a subtler miracle than cinematic triumph. And there's another ACIM layer, voice itself. The Course often speaks about listening to the voice for God versus the ego's voice of fear, accusation, and inadequacy. Birdie spends much of the film listening internally to humiliation, criticism, comparison, and inadequacy, the internalized voices of authority and judgment. Lionel functions partly as a corrective reflection, not inflating him, not pitying him, but persistently seeing beyond the frightened self-concept. That mirrors the function of a true teacher or healer in ACIM, not reinforcing the ego story, but quietly reminding someone of the wholeness beneath it. The final speech becomes symbolic not because a king spoke flawlessly, but because a terrified human being stopped hiding long enough to let communication happen through vulnerability instead of image management. And oddly enough, that makes his voice more trustworthy, not less.